So I think it's a good time to begin now. And again, I want to welcome everybody to the African Tea Time session today that is going to focus on Liberia and Nigeria. It's exciting to be able to discuss life, focusing on politics, socio-economic life, geography, history, and economic development generally of the continent of Africa, but with the focus on the two countries of Liberia and Nigeria. So the presenters for today, we have two presenters. We have Joe Greaves, who is from Liberia, but currently at Michigan State University under the Humphrey Fellow Scholarship. He's a fellow for 2021-2022, and is also Deputy Director for Research and Statistics in the Civil Agency of Liberia. And we're so pleased to have him here at MSU to begin with, and to be at the tea time to present today. Our second presenter is Professor Philip Effiong. I believe he hasn't joined the Zoom yet. He'll be joining us later, and is a professor here at Michigan State University as well in the Department of Theater. And the topic for Liberia's talk is going to be Liberia's scenario, some facts on history, politics, and economics. And from Nigeria's presentation, we're going to learn about Nollywood, roots, evolution, and prospects. So I'm really excited about this talk, and I'm always usually happy to hear from different presenters on different aspects of Africa. So I'm looking forward to both of the discussions, and at this time we will begin with Liberia, and I give the time to Joe Greaves, but actually I'm forgetting one thing. Our facilitator for the talk today is Emmanuel Chima. Emmanuel, are you here? Let's see. Emmanuel was... I
do not see him.
Okay, if he's not here, that's okay. We will continue with the presentation. Once he's here, you will see him just join in smoothly. If you see somebody else transitioning with the presentation, that's our facilitator, and his name is Emmanuel Chima. He's a graduate student in the Department of, in the School of Social Work here at Michigan State University. So Joe, I hand over to you to begin. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the family of Michigan State University, the Spartans. I'm in Washington, D.C., attending our 2021 Global Leadership Forum. So I have to leave the forum so that I can do my presentation as promised. I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to Dr. Damaris Choti for this opportunity. I was actually in Kansas when I networked with her, because I got her email actually from Michigan State University, and I sent email to her. I wanted to connect with her once I get to Michigan State University. So my name has already been given out, but I would like to begin with my middle name actually before starting my presentation. You know, I met an American professor once, and he told me, Joe, can you just write Joe Greaves? I told him, oh, no, that is not common really in Africa. And he said, why? I said, because anybody can be Joe Greaves. If you just go to Google and type in Joe Greaves, you'll see thousands of Joe Greaves popping up. But what distinguishes me from the rest of the Joe Greaves is my middle name, Kamoyu. And in the brain sective, Kamoyu means man will always be a child. Yeah, so that's the meaning of Kamoyu. So now to delay, today we'd like to focus actually on the geography of Liberia, looking at some basic history and focusing on politics, because we don't want to discuss the economic development aspect of today because of time factor. But as geography is concerned, it's very important that we showcase Liberia geographic settings. And why do we want to showcase Liberia geographic settings? Because not many people actually know what Liberia looks like. People have heard about Liberia as just the first independent African nation. Maybe few people here in Africa have just heard about Liberia from some celebrity like the current president of Liberia, George Weah, who was an ex-footballer and the first African to have won the world best, the European best, and the African best in 1995. And some also know about Liberia from Madam Ellen Johnson's early regime and all of that. So it will be good that we introduce Liberia to people. So this is our flag. As you see, it's not too different from that of the US. The only difference is we just have a star. That is very simple because Liberia has a kind of long-lasting relationship with the US. And those that designed the Liberian flag were all Americans, Susanna Lewis and her colleagues. They designed the Liberian flag, and some Americans wrote our independence. So we are located in West Africa. In West Africa, we have 16 countries, and our close neighbors are Sierra Leone, Guinea, and that of Africa, and we lie between this latitude in West Africa. Liberia is very fertile. That is, we have some kind of coastal land that is very, very unique for farming and also for hunting and all of that. So our mangroves are all unique. And once you come to Liberia, there are other sightings that we might want to show you. Say, hey, you might want to go to Bomi County, you might want to go to Sino, the Forest National Park, to see some wildlife and all of that. So there's a huge forest within one of the localities in Liberia. As you see, the forest is very rich. We have several natural resources in this forest. It's blessed and it's fertile from the look of that. So 40% of our country is being made by the rainforest within the Upper Guinean region. Liberia only has 2 seasons. We have both the wet and the dry season. And right now in my country, we are leaving from the wet season now, entering to the dry season. But in October, we still experience what we call the orographic relief rainfall, the kind of big raindrops that come down with heavy noise and all of that. Liberia is a very small country with approximately 5.1 million people, but that was 2008 statistics. Fundings from the World Bank and other international organizations this year, I think the population census is already ongoing because it has been 10 years now. So probably we will experience new population change. It might other drop because we realized COVID-19 outbreak as well. But then the one that was very alarming was that of the Ebola outbreak in March 2014 that took away thousands of lives and all of that. English is our language, is our major language, but we realize in the Liberian society, English is not frequently spoken there because we are so used to the pidgin English and all of that. So sometimes you find it too difficult to understand average Liberians when they really speak. Sometimes the accent is somehow frustrating and intimidating as well. But however, we try in as much as possible to get our conversation flowing. Liberia is divided into 15 counties. If you look at Liberia, it's in the shape of a shoe. So the northern part is where we have most of our minerals. We have the mountains in the northern part. But then there are other countries in Liberia, and we like to highlight that of Grand Bassa. This is where I'm from, actually. This is a historic county because during the free slave repatriation, most of those guys settled down in Grand Bassa County because Grand Bassa has a coastal, is part of the coastal belt. It has a port. So those guys that came from America, they transited through Grand Bassa, and Montserrat also is another historic, and this is where the capital city of Liberia is located in this county. That newer county that just formed part of Liberia was Bapolu, but then Nima being the largest of all of the counties. And Nima County, people from this region, they are well educated in the Liberia scenario. But Montserrat is the most populated county in Liberia because it is where the capital city, Monrovia, is actually located. So it has approximately 2.5 million people. This is our country. Initially, I told you that the shape is in a shoe form. So from Bombay to Sino County, so like in Liberia, you go, oh, Bombay, Sino. So I'm actually from number 4, Grand Bassa County. And Grand Bassa County is found right here. So whenever you come to Liberia, you might want to ask me to take you to Grand Bassa to go and eat some Ghana and Liberian domo and Liberian and other cuisine that we also have in our society. So having said that, I would like to introduce you to some of the way we conduct our governing system. Liberia will follow narrowly the American approach. So our 15 counties, we have superintendents that are appointed by the president as well. Now, our constitution follows the American style. So we conduct election, but superintendents are not elected. They are appointed by the president at his will. In our constitution, we don't elect chief justices. They are also being appointed by the president based on certain tenures and all of that. And chiefs and clans, they are also being appointed as well. Other sections in Africa, probably they might have election for these people. So the landscape of Liberia is very unique, but Liberia is surrounded by water. So sometimes we experience erosion in Liberia. So you see the rolling plateau. We have the kind of mountains in the northeast, Nima County and that of Lofa County. Our rainforest is rich. We have gold, diamond, iron ore in the natural rainforest. So that's where you see a whole lot of mining activities actually take place in Liberia. So our rivers, major rivers of Liberia, we have the Mano River. So in West Africa, we have Africa's Guinea, Liberia that form part of this Mano River. You call it Mano River Union because it's the river that divides the 3 countries. So if you look here, Sierra Leone is found right here, and Africa is somewhere in the east, and Liberia. So the river passes through the countries and all of that. But then Kavala River is the longest river within Liberia. So to go quickly, I would also like to introduce some mountains. We don't have many mountains in Liberia, but our mountains, we have Mount Wuduvi. Mount Wuduvi is one of the tallest mountains in Liberia, West Africa, but it's actually located between Liberia and that of Guinea. So minerals and all of that, we have the Billiton company that extracted a lot of minerals from Mount Wuduvi, and now we have ArcelorMittal that is also in the region doing mining activities as well. Then we have Mount Yekepa, Mount Nima, which is found in Yekepa and Nima County. Nima County is the largest county. It's blessed with mountains, but this mountain is actually formed between Guinea and Liberia as well. Again, and it is the tallest mountain in our country. We are endowed with gold. So gold now is being illicitly mined in our country. You realize that young people leave the cities, they go into the rural parts of Liberia to mine gold and all of that. So there are a lot of challenges that the government is faced with, where sometimes it is difficult to identify who's into gold mining activities in that region. So this is where currently, this is in Yekepa, and this is where ArcelorMittal is doing her mining activities. But then they extract the natural resources and leave the place so adamant, you realize that it's causing serious problem, erosion for the people in Nima County. And Liberia being a small country, sometimes the government has just little influence in mitigating some of these challenges. We have diamonds as well, but apart from diamond, gold, iron ores, we have other metallic minerals. So Liberia is endowed with so many natural resources. Then we have the second largest oil company in our country. It's called Firestone. There's an American company that signed 99 years agreement in 1929 during the regime of the first native of Liberia, Hillary Rachel Wright Johnson. When we go to the history part of Liberia, you will get to know. So this company have been operating in Liberia for a rock of ages, but then you realize that labor practice is not so unique in Liberia. It was called Firestone, but now the name have been changed to Bridgestone. So another company took over Firestone now. So if you go to Firestone, you no longer see Firestone, but you see a Bridgestone now. So crops, we are also blessed to have crops, and now we are into oil, palm oil. So this company called Golden Verona Limited is actually the sole producer of palm oil, but then they don't produce them domestically, but they try to export the palm oil. But there's one company, Liberian company, that is actually trying to compete one way or the other to produce some of the local commodities from oil palm and all of that. So women are also being involved in the planting of palm in this part of Liberia, and Golden Verona is actually found in Sino County. So the oldest county, as I told you, Grand Bassa, where I'm from, is one of the oldest county. It was founded in 1833. So during the 18th century, when free slaves came from America, they also settled along this area in Liberia. So if you go to Liberia today, most of the names from this region are all Western names. That's why you see my name is Greaves, and we have the Johnson, we have the Roosevelt, the Gibson. So those three names within the Liberian section. So those are elite people from this region. They too realized slavery, and because the great-great-grandparents lived with those free slaves, which we call the American Liberians. When we go to the history part, you'll get to understand those so-called American Liberians that settled down in Liberia. So this is just a partial view of some slum communities within Monrovia. So this part is the Bourgeois Island. Bourgeois Island is where you have most of the commercial activities. So the rivers, this is the Shebro Island River that passes Shush and Vitam. This place is called Vitam. And here is a cross. So this is Mama Point and all of that. All right, so another older county as well is the Maserado County, and this is where the capital city of Liberia is actually. And this is where the Declaration of Independence were actually signed. And this is the oldest church in Liberia. It's called Providence Baptist. Providence Baptist is the cornerstone of the nation. This is where all those guys like Summer Greenleaf, Susanna Lewis, and the rest of the people, they assembled during that time in 1847 and said, hey, we cannot find any country that we naturalized or colonized the people, so they need to declare themselves as independent nations. So they went into this church and they signed the Declaration of Independence. So this, in national policy, people who try to discuss issues mostly are from this section in the Baptist church. It's called Providence Baptist. So if you go to Broad Street in Liberia, Monrovia, you will see this structure is still there. All right, so now I would like to introduce you to the history of Liberia. You know, Liberia was the only country that was not colonized in Africa, though it has a kind of long-lasting history. Some claim to be that Liberia was colonized by America, but the complexity of all of these issues made Liberia do not have a kind of unique history, because the history is not so accurate. Sometimes we declare ourselves to be like stepchild to the US because we follow nearly everything of the US, the flag, the national anthem, and a way of lifestyle or American lifestyle. But however, we were never colonized by any country. So the first group of settlers that repatriated to Liberia, they arrived at this place called Malagueta Coast, and this was how Liberia was called initially. So there were 11,000 Black free settlers that settled along that region. And not only did they settle along that region, but then people who were involved in the slavery, like the slave master Paul Coffey, he was an American businessman and also an abolitionist. These were people who felt that slavery was no longer important in the US, so they were looking for a place to take the black people. So Liberia was identified as one of the suitable areas because due to its accessibility along the coastal belt. So through Sierra Leone and Liberia, the Shepherd Island, they settled along that region, but due to mosquito outbreak, they left from Shepherd Island and they came to Liberia to settle for some time. So the group of people, those slave masters, were covered under this umbrella of organization called American Colonization Society. And they actually were being headed by Paul Coffey. Paul Coffey also died while en route to other areas to look for a suitable place to repatriate these slaves and all of that. He also died from pestilence outbreak and all of that. So the tribes that they met there also is my tribe because it is the oldest tribe in Liberia and it's the largest tribe in Liberia, the Bassa tribe. So these so-called free slaves, when they settled along the coastal belt, they settled along Grand Bassa. Sino County was called initially Mississippi in Africa. So by the land, when these guys arrived, they realized that the land was so fertile and was endowed with so many resources like gold, diamond, iron ore, rubber, pepper, and the rest of that. So they thought it was that they needed to settle down, but then there was no unique form of government. So they tried to settle into that region and to form their own form of government, but then they try to marginalize the natives that they formed in those region. So when the group of Americans thought it was that they needed to leave Liberia, they started looking for other places that were accessible, other places that they felt there were no, there were not many challenges, more especially like the pestilence outbreak and mosquitoes. That's how they started moving to the east region, the Kenya and other parts of Africa as well, Ghana, Nigeria, to settle. So that's why you see today in Africa, more especially in West, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, those were colonized by Great Britain and they built institutions. But only Liberia, we do not have those kind of institutions that were established. So we are just on our own following any system that we feel we are used to or can transform sectors within our country. We follow them and we try to improve lives for the people. So when these guys settled, they discriminated against the indigenous Liberians and they classify themselves as American Liberians. And nowadays, when you go to Liberia, the American Liberians, they are in minority, but they are very powerful. They are not really in huge numbers in the country, but then they have the country wealth. It was just recently that the native boys actually started ruling the country in Liberia. So George Weah is a native, but then the American Liberians are not satisfied with his regime. So they are trying as much as possible to come back into power because they feel that Liberia does not belong to the indigenous. Liberia belongs to the American Liberians. So Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, great-great-grandparents were also part of the American Liberians. And she had that kind of lifestyle, even though her mother was a native, but then her father was also an American Liberian. So when she took over, she brought in most of her counterparts and they settled in Liberia, took most of them from the States and other part of the world to work in her government. So this is how the native boys were treated. We call them native boys in our country. The indigenous, when the American Liberians, when they arrived in Liberia along the coastal belt, they tried to discriminate against the guy because they have some knowledge in education and places that they settled were in Grand Bassa, Sino, Maryland, Macerado. So it was difficult for communication to flow. They used them. So my great-grandparent also lived with the American Liberian, but he was a native. But then the only way you could be opportune to go to school, you have to change your name for the traditional names and adapt the American Liberian name. So the Greaves came about. And so when my father was born, he did not come out with the native name, but then he took the Greaves. And nowadays, when you go in our society, once you call your name Greaves, they feel that you are part of the American Liberian secting. But however, we have native secting and all of that. That's why my middle name, I always try to include it. But then yet and still people believe that our parents ill-treated their parents over the period. But we don't fear stomach. He was the longest serving president of Liberia from 1944 to 1971. And he actually was one of the key persons who founded this so-called True Wing Party. And this True Wing Party was the party that discriminated a lot against the indigenous people. But then the regime of the so-called American Liberian came to an end after the death of this President William Richard Wright Hubert. Hubert was the last American Liberian president, and he actually was assassinated by a native called Samuel Canyon Doe. He assassinated him because he felt that the American Liberians were ill-treating the indigenous, and they were tired with our rules and all of that, so they got rid of him. But interestingly, if you go into our society, you'll see William R. Hubert, his great-grandchildren are also still there. And one of his great-grand wanted to be president, but in history repeated itself, and the guys are saying, no, we cannot elect you because your great-grandfather was so curious and he enslaved our people, so we cannot re-elect you or elect you as president of this nation. So the debate of who is the owner of Liberia, whether the natives or the American Liberian, is still something that we still don't have full understanding of. So now, and finally, I would like to look at the politics of Liberia. You know, our political system is very difficult. Liberia is a kind of country that have multi-party. So Joseph Jenkins Roberts, also who was part of the American Liberian section, was the first president. And he was not actually a Liberian by birth. According to history, he was from Lebanon. And his mother was actually from another country too, but then he was president of that country as well. So Liberia, over the period of years, have experienced political strifes and all of that. So initially we had the True Wing Party. And I told you about the True Wing Party was predominantly imparted by the so-called American Liberians, like the likes of Joseph Jenkins Roberts, the like of William R. Hubert. I think you would bear with me that the last name of these people represent the so-called American Liberians. So these are not native names. These are all English names and American names. So these were people that were enslaving the natives and all of that. But then the True Wing Party actually came to an end after William R. Hubert died. That's how people formed the National Patriotic Party that Charles Taylor brought about. So the first president who was actually born in Liberia was called William Richard Wright Johnson. But then his last name also shows that he was not a native. His parents were also part of the so-called American Liberian, but then he was born in Montserrat County. So that's how history picking up as the first native Liberian, but he's not actually a native. He's an American Liberian. When the first native that became president of Liberia was this guy who assassinated William R. Hubert. So Samuel Doe, he was from Sino County. He did not have no formal education. He came into power through the guns. But then he also tried to build institutions. He built the first stadium that we have in Liberia is named after him, Samuel Canyon Doe Sport Complex. So he was the first native to become president of Liberia. Then we have Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor also assassinated him. Charles Taylor, now the debate is still ongoing whether he was a native or part of American Liberian because his last name, but he was actually from the central region of Liberia. But his interaction, his lifestyle showed that his great-grandparents were also part of American Liberia. But then interestingly, he was so loyal to Liberia, but then he was a warlord. So this is a guy who is now in The Hague. Yeah, because he was arrested and turned over to The Hague for atrocity that he committed in Liberia. Then came the Iron Lady of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, in 2005. She has struggled. She has worked with so many institutions. So when she took over, people say another American Liberian has come back to power. So because her rule, though, she tried to bring Liberia back on the map, but then her rule showed that she was actually an American Liberian because she marginalized most of those native boys. She could not give them jobs so easily. She was bringing in her cousins. In our country, we call them cousins and relatives. Because those were people who were part of her regime. Then now we see the face of this native boy called George Weah, who is the current president of Liberia. He's actually an indigenous, but then he's not really doing well for the country. He's one of the worst so far, we can say, because the economy is scrambling day to day. But however, that's Africa, and we'll be going to election in 2023 soon. So probably people would like to get rid of him. So thank you. If you have questions and answers, we can go into that.
Oh,
all right.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't even really want to even go with your first name, and apologies for not including your middle name in the flyer.
All right.
I just went by the names that I know you, but I know you will forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an amazing talk, and it's not the first time I'm hearing or discussing, being in a discussion of the history of Liberia, but every single time that we talk about Liberia, there's something new that I get to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to be fast in interacting with you. At this time, I want to recognize Emmanuel Chima, who is the facilitator for today. I want to ask him to continue with the discussion. I have a question, but I'll ask it later. So thank you so much, Joe. No, come on you.
Come on you.
No, come on you.
Come
Yeah.
on you. Come on you.
Come on you.
Yep.
Yes, thank you so much for your talk, and I'll give this time to Emmanuel to continue, take us through the discussion part. Welcome, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Damaris. Like you said, fascinating presentation. Thank you very much, Joe. You'll forgive me, I'll stick with the easier name as I learn to pronounce your native name. But that was a very fascinating history, and that overview that you gave us of Liberia. A lot of these facts I'm learning for the first time, but Liberia has always been one of those intriguing nations given its history. And so I would like to invite questions from those that are online, and to engage with Joe and ask him to probe him to tell us more. I see Crystal turned on her camera. Did you want to go first, Crystal?
Oh, if no one else has a question, I would, thank you so much for this talk. You brought a lot of information together very beautifully, and I just really appreciated it. Having studied this history for a while now, and it's a lot, I'll just say that. So what I've been struggling with, and I was wondering if I could get some guidance from you, is around naming.
All right.
Naming different people. So I work with young Liberian folks, mostly in diaspora.
All right.
And so I name them or talk about them as indigenous, because they definitely do not identify as Americo-Liberian. Their families are not Americo-Liberians. But then when I'm writing the history, there's a lot of tension around, at least with some writers, as you probably know, some historians, some Liberian historians, around calling the settlers, or colonizers, or repatriates. So because it's not my history, not really, it kind of is as an African American, it's kind of my history too.
Yeah.
But obviously from a different position. So I'm trying to be very careful about how I name and frame the history as an outsider.
All right.
So I was just wondering what kind of insight you had to that. So I understand history as colonization. I see Americo-Liberians as settlers, but I know that's a contentious.
Yeah, so settlers is the name that is very easy in the Liberian history, because when Paul Coffey and his team repatriated the free slaves, showed that these guys, they settled along the coastal belt. First, they started off on the Shepherd Island. The Shepherd Island was in Sierra Leone, but then Sierra Leone was not a suitable place due to mosquitoes outbreak. So they fled and went to Liberia. But when they went to Liberia, they settled along the counties or along the coastal belt. That is Montserrado, Grand Bassa, my own county, and Sino. But Sino was called Mississippi at that time. So we don't call them, some the names can be used interchangeably. Some are colonizers, settlers, That's how we call them. But colonizer, because we were not colonized, even though they have the intention of colonizing other countries, like Sierra Leone were colonized by Great Britain. So on a general perspective, people consider countries that are colonized, they call those people who colonize the country as colonizer. But then Liberia are not colonized. So the reference name to use would be settlers, because they just settled in Liberia. But I don't know, history has not really shown us why they did not colonize Liberia, because Liberia has been one of the dwelling places for them when they were looking for a suitable place to send these free slaves from America. But then I was just reading development economics, and I realized that the colonized institutions that they felt, number one, were livable. Number two, there are probably mosquito outbreaks, but then I doubt it and say, but when it's due to pestilence, then Sierra Leone shouldn't have been colonized by Great Britain. So myself to try to do some research on that to understand. But I think settlers would be the reference name to actually use in your writing.
Okay, okay, that's good to hear. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask a question. So is there a way to identify the settlers, the American Liberians, apart from names? How do you guys use DNA or any other features or technology to identify them apart from their names?
Oh, thank you for your question. Actually, the name America was just added by the free slaves that settled in Liberia. Because when they landed in Liberia, they settled along the coastal belt, as I told you, Grand Bassa, Sino, and Montserrat County, but those are the three oldest counties in my country. So when they landed there, they saw that the land was very fertile. It was endowed with natural resources like gold, diamond, rubber, and the rest of that. But then they met the real owner of those places, the indigenous. But then due to the education they have acquired from the US and other places, they did not want to leave those places. So they formed a government because they realized that the indigenous were not governed. Nobody was governing them. So they settled their own government and say, hey, God, we used to use our expertise in education to rule these native boys. So that's how they formed a government, and they started to rule the indigenous boys. But then their names were pure American names and other English names, like Richard Wright Johnson, like Hillary and all of that, Gibson, like the Greaves, the Roosevelt. So, but then the indigenous boys really have the kind of traditional name, the Yakpa Wuru, the Zulu whiskey, those are the native names. So in our country today, normally we identify people as American Liberian by the name and from their settlement. If you are from Grand Bassa, from where I am, if you go to Grand Bassa, the names are frequent, like those American names and British names, because there were most of the American Liberian they resided. We have a place called Edina Cove, but Edina Cove is a historic place within Grand Bassa. So nowadays, when you go there, you see those so-called American Liberian that lived during those years. They still have their homes still in that place as well. Lower Haddonfield, Upper Haddonfield, even Buchanan, because Buchanan is the capital city of my region. It was named after the first mayor of America, who was called Thomas Buchanan. So he named that place. And he was a Black American too. So he was considered to be an American Liberian. So they also born our children in the region. And when our children came to, they adapted the culture and they enslaved the indigenous people. So technically, and to make a long story short, I would say in Liberia, we don't have technology to identify whether the person is an American or indigenous, but the names and looking at history, it shows that those were the unique names. They were all American Liberians.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Now, another question that I have is that, so from what you just said, there seems to be a whole lot of conflict between the settlers and the indigenous Liberians.
Yes.
So in Nigeria, that's the same thing. Northern part of Nigeria tends to fight a lot with the southern part. So we came up with an informal policy whereby the president will be from the north, while the vice president will be from the south, and vice versa. Is there anything like that in Liberia?
Sadly, I would tell you, say no. Like before we were born, well, I can remember once my father told me that his father was a native, but then his father was forced to change his last name or native name to an American Liberian name. That was the only way he could be able to go to school. That was the only way he could go to hospital. So the guys were discriminated against. They were deprived equal opportunities. A native boy could not go to school with an American Liberian. A native boy will work 24 hours. So once they realize that you are committed and you are very strong, they give you options. You want to go to school. If you say you want to go to school, then you have to change the traditional name to our name. So that's how they adapted the American Liberian's name. So in Liberia, history has shown that the American Liberian have been the lead. It means they have ruled Liberia for many, many years. That regime actually came to an end after William Aratobo died, because he was the last American Liberian that was assassinated by the first native, Samuel Kedu. But then we have had like two natives who have, the current George Weah is a native, but then the American Liberians who have like children, like Benoni Ure. The Ure is a familiar name in Liberia. If you go to Liberia, you call a Ure. People will know that a Ure is not a native. He's a son of an American Liberian, and he's fighting. He wants to get back to power because they feel disenchanted that Liberia should not be governed by native, because the native don't understand about governance system. So the native have been marginalized just recently because they have been educated. So they have gone to places and they are making more money now. They have opportunity to sit in the public and interact with the American Liberians. So we don't have that same system that you have in Nigeria, where somebody who is an elite would be president and the native be vice president. No.
Okay, thank you so much. It was exciting to learn about Liberia.
Yeah,
I've really increased my knowledge on the country. Thanks again.
all right.
I see Olawale has his hand up, and I'll let him ask his question. And Joe, feel free to stop sharing your screen. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm getting you loud and clear.
I really enjoyed this presentation. You've saved me the stress of reading about Liberia, and I really appreciate it for the historical exposition that you've just done. And I used to know that there is only one country in Africa that wasn't colonized by any colonial master. But you've made me know now that there are two. Because I used to know that Ethiopia remains a country that wasn't colonized by any of the colonial masters, by Britain in the history of Africa. So I don't know which comes first between Ethiopia and Liberia, because now through your presentation I've been able to know that we have Liberia, we have Ethiopia. So which of the two come first? Thank you.
So thank you for that question. All right, so for me, technically speaking, Liberia was actually founded in 1822. But Ethiopia is the oldest African country, but Liberia is the first independent country in Africa. So from my point of view, Liberia was the first country that settlers from America settled, but then it was not colonized. Yeah, so Liberia, in my mind, Liberia was not colonized, but then it was identified as the first country where free slaves settled. So it was never colonized. I think Liberia came first before.
No, I think Ethiopia will come first.
Ethiopia, right? Yeah, Ethiopia is the oldest country.
Yeah, it will come first. Even right from the biblical times, we used to hear about Ethiopia. So they have been there for a very long time.
All right. Thank you for that clarity. All right.
Sure, I have a question. Throughout your presentation, one of the distinguishing factors between Americo-Liberians and native Liberians that you mentioned was you used the word lifestyle. I'm curious if you can unpack for us what that means. What does that mean exactly when you say they have a lifestyle that is distinct from the other wider native population?
Yeah, so now when you go to Liberia, properties owner found many among the American Liberians. When I'm talking about property owner, I'm talking about real estate, right? So like the government buildings on Broad Street, the government were renting most of the buildings from the elite. They have the so-called American Liberians because a family built those buildings and left those buildings as heritage for their children. So when our children got big and acquired education in Great Britain, in the US, they returned and they tried to rent out a building to government institutions. So it is nowadays that the native boys, because like I told you, the native boys are competing too, they are going to school, they're going to the US and going to Great Britain and all of that. So they are building some gigantic buildings as well. But you still see that difference in terms of the lifestyle. So an indigenous boy lifestyle will be quite different. For instance, like the Providence Baptist Church that I show you as the oldest church in my country, which is a faith there where the Declaration of Independence was signed in July 1847. In that church, if you go there, the names that you hear in the church are all American Liberian names, like the Greaves, the Williams, the Sims, and the rest of that. So the native boys form their own churches and they belong mostly to the Pentecostal churches. You don't really find them into the unique churches like the Baptist, the Methodist, the Episcopal church, and even the Catholic church. It is just recently that due to the education and maybe money that they have acquired now, they're trying to, but yet and still some of those guys don't feel safe interacting with them and all of that. Even the Masonic temple that we have in our country, native boys were never allowed to form part of the Mason. They just recently, again, due to education and the wealth that they are accumulating, allowed them to form part of the Mason. Yeah, so those are some of the differences I can highlight. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. That's very helpful. I suppose a follow-up question would be, you mentioned how there was a generation that changed names in order to access education, a native segment of the population.
Yeah.
Having been afforded those opportunities, wasn't their socioeconomic status also improved? Or is sort of the wealth and power still centralized with Americo-Liberians, even though some of the native population also had access to education? Is there then a sort of an in-between group that maybe is not as impoverished as the native population that had no access to some of these opportunities? Could you speak to that a little bit? I'm just curious.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Now, like my father, my great grandfather was a native, but he has to change his last name to acquire education. So when he changed his last name to Greaves, he also felt that he was no longer a native. So he became part of the Americo-Liberian family. So he too started to, like to marginalize other people in his own will and all of that. So that's why in my society nowadays, for me, my name is being considered to be a household name. So when you go in my region in Grand Bassa County and you call a Greaves, nobody is going to be surprised who a Greaves is. So we have properties right in my region, and people are going to tell you that, yeah, these are the real owner of this area, because even if I committed a crime, which I know I will not commit a crime, but then my name is not going to be strange. People might protect me somehow because of the affiliation that I've had. So at times I don't consider myself to be a native. I consider myself to be a great grandson of the American Liberian family. Well, my great grandfather was a native, but then he formed part of the American Liberian. So that's how it is nowadays in our society. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. I can see there how those systems and structures of power
Yeah.
replicated themselves even among the native population that
Yeah,
had
sure.
access to those opportunities.
Yep.
We have we could time to take on maybe one more question or comment from anyone else before we invite Professor Effiong. Olawale, you had another question. Please feel free to.
Yes, I just have a short question. I want to ask. Now we talk about the Liberian American and the natives. So
Yeah.
um, the last population, I mean, census that was done in your country,
Mm-hmm.
who among the two, groups is the most popular? Most popular.
Well, thank
You
you.
get the question? Yeah.
Yeah. So our last census was conducted in 2008, and the population result at that time showed that Liberia a population of 5.1 million people. From the beginning of my presentation, I don't know whether it came earlier or late, but the most powerful people in my country are the so-called American Liberians, and, people, but they are in minority. But they are in minority doesn't mean that they are not powerful. In numbers, they are less, but they are very powerful, right? Because of their connection. And even in the US, they have a huge community residing in the US. And these are places that is settled and form the government. So during elections, they go back home. And one good thing I love about them, they are very united. Unlike the indigenous boys are divided because of power struggle, right? So nowadays, people are like worried. It would have been better the American Liberians continue to lead Liberia, but we thought our own indigenous boys will improve the livelihoods of the people, but now it's not happening. So even the natives are even complaining and they are regretting why they did not even elect the so-called American Liberians and children like Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was part of the American Liberian family. So she brought in all of her family or relatives, we call them cousins and all of that. They took all of the big positions, like the former central bank governor, Dr. Mill Jones, like the last name. So if you go to Liberia, you have to be very cognizant about the last name. So any names that have that kind of sweet, like it's very easy to pronounce, and sometimes you might want to ask the person which region are they from. Do they have any connection with American Liberian? But some natives now, for intermarriage, so natives are marrying to American Liberian great grandchildren and all of that. So their names too are changing, but then they are so satisfied and feel happy that they have gotten some unique names that replace the native names. So when they go to some public gatherings, they feel proud. Like my wife, she's now taking my last name as Greaves. But her father is actually from the north, and those are the indigenous people. So her last name is Colley. But then she feels satisfied to be called Greaves because whenever she goes somewhere, we call the name Greaves. Nobody is actually going to be in doubt. We're going to be happy to call your name. Oh, Mrs. Greaves, Mr. Greaves, Mr. Greaves. Liberia is very small, so everybody knows everybody in Liberia. So that's how it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for that very insightful presentation. I'm sure after today, all of us will go back into the history books to learn more.
Yep.
And anybody else, feel free to reach out to Joe to continue this conversation. At this point in African Tea Time, I want to welcome Professor Philip Effiong from the Department of Theater here at MSU, who's going to present on Nollywood, Roots, Evolution, and Prospects. Professor Effiong, this is your time. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, you're very audible. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to warn you, I typically don't present from this office that I'm in now because the lights are sensor controlled. So if I don't move for a while, the lights will go out. If that happens, don't worry. It'll just take me a second to wave my hand or something and they'll come back on. For now, I'd like you to please give me the permission to share my screen if I don't already have that permission.
You're a co-host now.
Thank you. Okay, I believe you can see my screen.
Yes.
All right. Today I'm presenting on Nigeria's Nollywood, which I subtitle Evolution and Prospects. Okay, there we go. Now, Nollywood mirrors two well-known areas of film production, which is Hollywood in California and Bollywood in Bombay, even though there are many other woods out there. And it refers to the large number of actors that have emerged on the Nigerian filmmaking scene since the 1990s, mainly, and the resulting production of thousands of movies. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss the roots of the film industry in Nigeria, its economic and global implications, especially for the youth, the uniqueness of Nollywood, the prospects for improvement, and its potential to motivate the youth to explore and advance other sectors. Now, as far as the roots of Nollywood, it really goes back to a widespread culture and history of performance, both secular and sacred, that can be found in several ethnic groups. And they involve oral traditions and narratives, masquerade traditions and performances, festivals, rituals and ceremonies, which could be relate to death, marriage, child naming ceremonies, and so forth, the coronation of chiefs and kings, and dramas that were occasionally performed in the courts of some of the traditional rulers. The key theatrical elements that you'll find across these various forms of performance include music, dance, song, costuming, mime, impersonation, and dialogue. Now, social and industrial changes would affect performance patterns in Nigeria as a result mainly of colonialism. Colonialism, like you know, would bring in a number of social, religious, political, and economic changes. One of the major results was the emergence of the Yoruba traveling theater. And these troupes appeared mainly in the 1940s and continued in several ways to even the modern era. And they were influenced mostly by the Alarinja traditional or mask theater, which some scholars would date back to the 14th century. Now, with new forms of transportation, the traveling theaters would emerge, and for the most part, they portrayed, like the Alarinja traditional theater, they portrayed indigenous folk tales, mythology, history, but as well as social, political, religious, and cultural changes that came in through colonialism. And in Nigeria, some of these well-known names are Hubert, Ogunde, Kola, Ogunmola, and Duroladipo. And they initially performed mainly in Yoruba, but as they began to travel more widely to non-Yoruba speaking areas, they would provide translated synopses of their performances. And in time, they would also begin to adopt English and Pidgin English, which they would use for their performances. I'm going to show you a brief clip here of what these performances, what these traveling theaters generally look like. I'm just going to show only a short part of this video.
ẹni bá débẹ̀ ló lè sọ ìròyìn dákúndúbà lọ́ọ̀dẹ abíjírí ẹ má bọ̀ ní hòtẹ́ẹ̀lì kọjá ìdí ìrókò. láti kí ni Hotel Frontier àtọmọdé àtàgbà tí obìnrin àtọkùnrin la pè síbẹ̀ àtàrúgbó tẹ̀sí.
Meet Chief Hubert Ogunde, showman extraordinary and father of...
Okay, I'm going to stop there. I just wanted you to get a sense of what these traveling theaters look like. And even though they would increasingly begin to appear on more contemporary stages, they still maintained a lot of their original attributes. So you see a lot of dancing, a lot of singing, and a lot of interaction between the performer and their audiences. Now, as a result of technological changes, these traveling theaters, their organizers would begin to take their shows to TV, and some of Nigeria's historical filmmakers like Hubert Ogunde, that I mentioned earlier, and Moses Olaya, who were traveling theater organizers, were actually originally, like I stated, these were originally traveling theater organizers. They would eventually take some of their shows to the modern film industry, to TV, and become some of the early historical filmmakers in Nigeria. Interestingly, Nigeria's first TV station, the Western Nigeria Television, was established in Ibadan, which is predominantly Yoruba-speaking areas, in 1959. So this provided access for traveling theater practitioners to bring their shows to TV. Now, Nigeria has actually had a long-standing history before Nollywood of performances on TV, like I stated, TV series, TV films. Things Fall Apart, for instance, a major novel known across the continent, was performed on Nigerian TV long before Nollywood, and it was a series. It was shown in parts, and even before the establishment of TV stations in Nigeria from the 50s, as early as 1926, like I mentioned here, the first movie made in Nigeria featuring Nigerian actors was actually done in 1926, titled Palava, except that it was done by an English filmmaker. And in 1957, the first film to be shot in color was Fincho, was made by a Latvian filmmaker. The common themes of these films, which were initially made by Europeans, was basically the impact of industrialization on Nigerian society as a result of colonialism. And so the question now is, in spite of the fact that there has been a long-standing tradition of making films or using the electronic media or using TV stations, how do these movies compare with today's Nollywood? And so it's important at this point to see the difference. You know, what exactly is exclusive to Nollywood as opposed to these early films? For one, most of the script writers and producers of Nollywood are Nigerians, but Nollywood, more importantly, involves a record number of young artists and performers, partly resulting from the increased availability of home video cameras. But this industry has also been provoked by growing unemployment of youth and failure of governments to invest in youth through education and skills enhancement. So the overwhelming presence of young people is important here, although we have older people involved in the industry. The narratives also of a lot of Nollywood movies are often divided along regional, ethnic, and religious lines, and they address the concerns of specific ethnic groups. They use indigenous languages, but many are also more diverse and combine indigenous languages with Pidgin and English, while there are those that rely almost entirely on the English language to reach vast audiences. As a result of this background, the quality of these movies have been affected in a number of ways. One of the downsides is the fact that many of the artists lack extensive experience or training in movie making, though they deserve to be commended for their efforts. Critics estimate, for instance, that up to 50 movies are produced a week. And this often results in poor quality, hurriedly shot movies with less than sophisticated equipment. And many times great acting, we find great acting, but it's alongside poor and less than convincing acting. Also, plots are often predictable and there's little room for critical thinking, surprise, and revelation. In addition to some of these challenges, issues around identity and stereotypical depictions. There are concerns, for instance, about the extent to which these movies challenge or reinforce widely held beliefs about religion and specific social representations. There are common stereotypes, the wicked mother-in-law, the untrustworthy gold-digging floozy, noble Christianity versus demonic traditional religions, the bad wife, and so forth. Essentially, there are some social depictions that a number of critics believe need to be challenged, and there should be greater room to acknowledge and respect different values and belief systems. Now, to make my point, I'm going to show you a short clip here. Here is an instance where an uncle is sending some demonic powers to destroy his niece. And his niece, he goes to the traditional healer to get those demonic forces or powers, and his niece turns to Christianity for help. I'm going to show this short clip, after which I'll make a couple of comments.
Oh Jesus, I have come before your presence. Your word says, no weapon fashioned against me shall prosper. My uncle Eze, paid 5,000 naira to eliminate my life. I am paying this 20,000 naira to this higher altar. This altar fight for me. Father, fight for me in the name of Jesus. Father, fight for me in the name of Jesus. I shall not die. I shall not die. Love me!
Why? No! 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 No!
Okay, I'll stop there. There are a number of things that bother me about this clip, and I've seen such representations repeated over and over again in these movies. One, the young lady goes to church to counter the demonic forces that have been unleashed on her by her uncle, and in the process, she gives money. That bothers me a little because there's this prevalent notion that when you go to church, you give money and God will do things for you. People may believe that. I don't. The other thing is, if you look at the representation of the angel, I believe that if they could get a white angel, they would, but the next best thing is to clothe the angel in white. If you clothed that angel in black, the angel would represent something evil. So that raises a number of questions about the depiction of color. And then the traditional healer, as in many of these movies, is presented as uncouth, as evil, as somewhat crazed. And again, this bothers me because my own grandfather was a traditional healer and he wasn't anything like the man you see in this clip or in a number of other movies. So some of those stereotypes and some of those depictions, I think, need to be addressed, and there can be more balanced representations. I want to digress a little bit here and talk about the actors and their life off stage. Many times we think of what they do on stage, but I think off stage, they continue to be influential. There are concerns, for instance, that some of them promote the notion of superior lighter skin complexion. There are allegations of these actors, mainly women, bleaching their skin with hopes that this would help advance their career. If this becomes a standard trend, it can have far-reaching consequences on self-esteem and the reinforcement of new forms of prejudice. I'm not going to show this YouTube video, but if you look at the images, these are images of actors that have actually bleached their skin, and you can see the difference. And I did go back and do some research on these actors, and it is accurate, the information here. Still talking about the actors and their lives off stage. Another thing that I think is important is the fact that in many Nigerian and African countries, there is, like I state here, they are notably homophobic, with some of them having laws that make homosexuality illegal, as in Nigeria, for instance. Now, there is a growing conversation citing celebrities and Nollywood stars as openly gay. Now, like I state here, though they are subject to ridicule and victimization, their superstar status also affords them a degree of protection. And therefore, I think they may eventually become the channel through which this conversation and other such difficult social issues can be addressed respectfully and responsibly, rather than resorting to violence or hostility. Having talked about some of these problems and issues and challenges, I think it is important to commend the efforts to expand thematically, which is something that is happening a lot more with Nollywood movies. I see them exploring wider spaces and reaching more global audiences. There is also a remarkable improvement in quality. There's a movie I watched recently, The King of Boys. The King of Boys is amazing. The actors are great. The way they intersperse the Yoruba language with English is also remarkable and very effective. And just the overall plot and storyline, I think, is captivating and very engaging. Also, on the subject of expansion, a lot of Nollywood movies are now being watched, not just all over the continent, but in the Caribbean as well, and on international flights. I also see an expansion of ideas. Some of them are now being set abroad, which I think is important, because a lot of these producers and actors want to present lifestyles and other worldviews just beyond the African continent, and I think that should be encouraged. I've also seen instances where African-American actors like Todd Bridges have acted in a Nollywood film. And we also see a number of Nigerian actors playing characters from other cultures and other nationalities, like American characters, for instance. In 2008, the movie Beyonce and Rihanna involved Nigerian actresses portraying these two popular singers, Beyonce and Rihanna. And still on expansion, there have been a number of collaborations with Ghanaian producers and actors. And by the way, Ghana has had a long movie history, a cinema industry that probably goes back to the 80s, and it's called Nollywood. So these partnerships, I think, are very important, as I think the collaborations are going to introduce new ideas as people bring different skills, different cultural values, different narratives from different settings. I think that only enriches the industry. Also, still on the subject of expansion, Netflix is now showcasing Nigerian movies, and apart from helping to advertise these movies, they're also helping to stem the problem of piracy. There is also something called Nollywood USA. These are Nigerian films made in the diaspora. They're not necessarily always shot in the USA, but mostly in non-African countries. And the filmmakers are typically Nigerians living abroad. Nollywood USA tells Nigerian stories, like I state here, and their stars are often established Nollywood actors who perform alongside Nigerian and African actors living in the diaspora. So here are my final thoughts based on what I've said so far. Nollywood is the process of filmmaking in Nigeria using resources that may be adequate and sometimes inadequate. It is an extremely vital social, economic, and entertainment resource, making it possible for the first time for Africans to view films made by other Africans on a massive scale. This is relatively new. And a lot of people, because of Nollywood and other such film industries on the African continent, many people are turning to movies that actually focus on issues about Nigeria, Ghana, Africa, and other countries on the continent. Growing up, that wasn't my experience. I'd say 90–95% of the time I watched movies made abroad in mostly American and European countries. Nollywood is also important in refuting commonly held views that women performers are cheap, wayward, and immoral. Now we see women coming out and performing just because they want to perform and regardless of what society thinks or says. And some of them in performing, apart from demonstrating remarkable talents and skills, some of them are also performing in power positions or are influential and respected in society. Nollywood is also an invaluable channel, like I state here, for innovative creation of employment and business opportunities, mostly by the youth. And this is achieved under very difficult industrial and educational circumstances. So these young people deserve a lot of praise and commendation. Remember that it is estimated that Nollywood generates somewhere between $590 to $600 million annually. And so being such a massive employer, I think educational institutions and applicable governmental agencies should invest more in training programs for these young artists. And subsequently, I'm just going to read the rest of this since I'm almost at the end. Subsequently, and beyond entertainment, Nollywood can advance the importance of movies as a vital resource for challenging widely held conventional beliefs and for rethinking issues that often provoke discomfort. In other words, the potential to expand, not just in terms of quality, but in terms of themes, to expand thematically. There's tremendous room to do that. And I think training programs would really help to achieve that goal. And so I conclude by saying, in the end, and despite some challenges, Nollywood continues to serve as a prototype for the youth especially, and for Nigerians and Africans in general, to believe that they can explore and advance other sectors of the economy. In other words, if they can do it for the film industry, then they can also do it for other sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Effiong, for that very insightful presentation, taking us through the inner workings of Nollywood. At this point, I invite those present to field questions and to engage in conversation with Professor Effiong. I think to get us going, I had a question in mind. What are some of the ways in which Nollywood today still reflects that culture of performance that has existed in Nigerian culture all along? Has Nollywood strayed away from that, or has that been preserved in some shape or form?
Oh, no, Nollywood, I don't think has ever completely strayed away from that, because you still see strong elements of dance, for instance, of song. Not only in performances that are set in rural areas, but somehow, even in the industrial areas, you still see that coming out. And apart from that, you see a strong preservation of family values, which has also been a part of traditional performances. You know, if you look at the performance history and culture of a lot of societies, family values and the values of those societies are preserved, are part of the reason why those performances, whether they're secular or religious, that's one of the reasons why those performances happen. So you'll see that. You'll still see a number of family structures, traditional family structures reflected. And once in a while, if someone is getting married, for instance, then you find indigenous forms of marriage. It doesn't matter whether the city is Abuja or Lagos, you see those things still happening. So they're there. I think the question is, how do we continue to balance both without losing, you know, what obtained in the past with some of the new developments today?
Thank you. Olawale, did you want to ask Professor Effiong a question?
Sir, I just want to thank Professor Philip for the wonderful presentation. I'm from Nigeria, as my name implies. I also want to tell Professor to go and watch the part 2 of The King of the Boys. It has part 2 now, so you can go watch it. What I just want to talk about, want you to help me talk about, for the benefit of everyone, is that what is the film industry in the North like, in terms of, you know, sustaining the culture, the Northern culture? What was it like? I just want to have an idea of what is it like. I mean, the northern part of Nigeria.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There are actually films that are done in indigenous languages, in the dominant language of the North, which is Hausa. But because I don't speak the language, you know, I haven't really watched a lot of those movies. But the fact that they exist means that a number of the lifestyles, the practices, perhaps the dominant religion, which is Islam, is reflected in those movies. That's what I suspect. And I'm sure when we watch those movies, you look at the clothing, you look at the architecture. There are some things that are very unique to the North. So I'm sure that they will be depicted quite prominently in those movies, including the food. You know, all the tools that are eaten in the North, which we don't necessarily eat a lot of in the South. I believe that is there, but I wish I could say more. You know, my not understanding Hausa has prevented me from really watching a lot of those movies. I'm sure some of them are done in the English language or maybe Pidgin, but the vast majority done in English and Pidgin are really from the South, mostly done by Yoruba producers and Igbo producers as well. And I will watch part 2 of that movie. Let me just say that.
Thank you, Prof.
Damaris, you wanted to comment?
Yes, thank you so much. I first want to say thank you to Professor Effiong for the wonderful presentation. It really encompassed everything from social to economics to portraying the way of life generally through the Nollywood film industry. So the question I had is in relation to the comment you raised about the misrepresentation, I would say, of the culture and social life with the clip that you gave of basically, I would say the representation of the cultural aspects, for example, the traditional healer and the way the woman, the niece, was kind of representing the religion, the Christianity as the way out of the evils of within society. So I wanted to ask, which channels do you think would be best to correct some of these misrepresentations? Is it through, like within the school system? Is it like, which way do you think would be best to perhaps try to make things right, especially in terms of content?
I think that's a great question. I'm not sure the extent to which education can do it. I think there's that possibility, but let's remember that there's some institutions that are affiliated with specific religions. So they're most likely, if I go to say Catholic school like I did, most likely a lot of what's going to be presented to me is Catholicism as the right way to God. So some of those institutions that are religiously focused or that have been established by particular religions may be problematic. But fortunately, there are many institutions that are not like that. Educational institutions that are not like that. And what I think we need to do is provide a balanced view without necessarily condemning one or the other. I have no problem with people practicing fervently Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, as long as you feel that that's the pathway to your spiritual growth and fulfillment. But it's important to just understand that there are other pathways that people believe in. And some educational institutions may do that, but then the movie itself, the industry, can also elect to do that independently of educational institutions by deciding that regardless of how I grew up, regardless of what I was taught or what's being taught in certain institutions, the truth is that we come from diverse spiritual backgrounds, and we need to respect those backgrounds, even if we don't agree with them. I'm not asking anybody to convert, but even if we don't agree with them, it's important to develop that mindset where you understand, just like you have to respect different cultural backgrounds, it's important to respect different religious backgrounds. And I think that would create or help to create greater stability and harmony within society. So yes, to an extent, educational institutions. But in spite of educational institutions, if I was in the industry, for instance, I would advocate some of those redefinitions of the images that we see out there, whether they have to do with social representations or religious representations.
Thank you so much.
I had another question, Professor Effiong, about how Hollywood productions that tell Nigerian stories, how they impact Nollywood. And I'm thinking in particular, Chimamanda's movie, or the movie that's based on her novel, Half of a Yellow Sun, how, a movie like that, which attempts to tell an authentic Nigerian story, but through a different platform, how does that impact Nollywood and, theater in Nigeria? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think Half of a Yellow Sun, it wasn't done through Nollywood. So I believe that's part of your question, that when we see that, how does that impact Nollywood? I think it should challenge Nollywood. I don't think there's anything that Nollywood cannot achieve as long as you decide that, okay, we're going to explore new avenues for growth. The truth, however, is that when you look at Half of a Yellow Sun, an Igbo woman telling the story of the Nigerian Civil War, there are always going to be those who say, as long as she's Igbo, she's going to be swayed in her perspectives. And so I would just say, let there be other input on the same story. We don't have to have one narrative about a story. So the Igbos were affected most adversely in that experience, but everybody was affected one way or the other. So what does a young Yoruba person think who didn't grow up like Chimamanda? What does a young Ijaw person think? What does a young Fulani person think? So those different perspectives, I think Nollywood should be challenged to broaden the conversation and now provide other perspectives. But let me just add that if we look at a lot of the movies that you know, like if you look at Snow White, for instance, which is a fairy tale. Original fairy tale was probably 10, 15, 20 pages maybe. There have been different versions of Snow White that have been made into movies. The same thing with Cinderella. We have as much, if not more, narratives that we can begin to explore. So you have historical narratives like, you know, Chimamanda represents in Half of the Yellow Sun. But from the repertoire of our cultural stories, we have a lot more that we haven't yet explored. And I think that should be another challenge for Nollywood.
Awesome, thank you. You touched on earlier a little bit about quality, and you shared with us, you know, how Netflix is now also incorporating Nigerian productions. Do you see that as one way of ensuring quality control? Because I noticed the Nigerian productions that you find on YouTube are not necessarily the same ones that you find on Netflix. There's sort of that filtering. Do you think that's one positive step towards pushing for quality?
Absolutely. I think in a sense you answer the question. A lot of these production companies or film-related, TV-related companies like Netflix are only going to settle for certain types of quality. And if you don't meet those standards, you know, chances are they're not going to work with you. So I think that should be an incentive. You're absolutely right. And with that incentive, I think we're going to see an upsurge, an improvement in quality. It is certainly, like you've pointed out, it is certainly a channel through which producers and actors can be challenged even more and pushed even harder to meet higher standards. I think Netflix can help with that and other such related channels.
Yeah. I wonder what are some of the cons of the commercialization of theater in Nigeria, that now, you know, there's this money aspect to it. Is that something you speak to in your work? Do you look into those?
It's something that you really can't avoid in modern society. Originally, a lot of the traditional related performances I talked about were really just communally owned narratives and ceremonies and festivals that the people enjoyed with a lot of theatrical elements, and not necessarily anybody having to pay anything. You know, the payment was in the community coming together and enjoying it. Now, you know, with changes in society, you know, the actor has to be paid. And the actor is not necessarily operating from the standpoint of being communally, of representing the community, but of representing individual talent and individual skills. And as long as that individual element there, and people are going to expect to be paid individually, I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with the fact that mechanisms for a long time were not in place to ensure that people were remunerated properly. And so piracy has been a problem. You know, you just take the movie, you reproduce it, and you sell it in public in Nigeria without anybody being afraid. And I think one of the things that Netflix is doing is preventing that kind of piracy. Many would argue that there's a degree of selfishness, you know, when the actor promotes him or herself for profit. But I don't know how an actor in modern society can really go around that. And besides, if football players can earn that much, let these young people earn. These young people, besides, have also been deprived. A lot of young people didn't grow up the way I grew up in Nigeria. They've been deprived a lot in terms of quality education, in terms of employment opportunities. So, I respect the fact that they're using this avenue to sustain themselves.
Thank you. For the remaining time, I just want to invite those that are still on, that we're a smaller group, we can have a conversation with Professor Effiong before we're done. I see Ife is still on, and Crystal, Julia, Edith. Feel free to unmute yourselves and join the conversation. I don't want to monopolize the remaining time we have with Professor Effiong. I get to see him on other platforms as well. So I want to invite everyone to converse with him while we can. We still have a good 15 or so minutes. So if there's any burning question or comment you'd like to field, feel free to do so. Hello, Alif, go ahead.
Professor Philip, thank you for the exposition. What I want to ask, if now that we have Netflix, helping actors, to make money, can we have that kind of platform like Netflix in Nigeria, where those who can't fit into the standard of Netflix can just go and that's my question, sir.
Okay, but I understood well whether we can have the equivalent of Netflix locally. Absolutely, if that's the question. One of the challenges, I think, for a lot of young Nigerian businessmen and women, whether it's in entertainment or any other sector, is the enabling environment. That's what they need. So is there going to be an enabling environment? An enabling environment means how difficult is it? Are you going to make it? Or how relatively easy and straightforward are you going to make it for these people to be able to set up such businesses? And infrastructurally, are they going to have the support they need? Everything from power supply to other, technological equipment and resources. I think that's the question for me. Otherwise, I have no doubt that the capacity is there. And one of the reasons why I say this is wherever you have these young people outside of Nigeria, they excel. I don't think they excel outside of Nigeria because they suddenly become brilliant when they leave Nigeria. I think they excel because of the enabling environment provided for them in other places. This is why I say that at some levels, educational institutions,
You talked about Nollywood USA. So this is my first time of hearing about that. So do you think it would be counterproductive to the local industry?
No, not at all. Not at all. The Nollywood USA, it's just a way of involving people who live in the outside of Nigeria to be involved in the business, but they collaborate. They all work together. So no, it's not. I think it is. It is to the advantage of the industry because it will help the industry grow.
Yeah, but you said most of the scenes are settled in non-African localities. Yeah. So won't that be a problem? I mean, they're not really portraying the African culture and some of these stuffs.
No, you're absolutely right. But let's remember also that the world is becoming smaller and smaller. I don't think when you portray other things that you're necessarily discarding your own original values. I think it is a way of establishing the fact that we're interconnected with the rest of the world. So sometimes it is necessary. Remember that unfortunately, a lot of representations or misrepresentations of societies on the African continent have come from outside. you know, if these representations are balanced, I have no problem. It's just that many of them are very stereotypical, you know. So if others feel like they have the capacity to come and represent us or come and explore our world, I think we should feel the same way, because we're everywhere anyway. We're everywhere and we're part of so many societies. So I think it is important for us to begin to acknowledge our presence in these places and to also represent the new lifestyles that we're engaged in. In the process, we don't necessarily have to devalue or look down on those things that are original to us. But I think an expansion of our mindsets and understanding of the world is important. I really think so.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think along those lines, I'm curious a little bit about how Nollywood productions have been perceived and received in the Caribbean. I have a small sense of how Nollywood productions are perceived on the continent a little bit, and maybe here. Can you share with us how the African diaspora in places like the Caribbean, what's their take on these productions? How do they engage and benefit from them?
Yeah, you know, from my interactions with the people from the Caribbean who've watched or interested in these movies, they like them. And it's interesting because a lot of these movies, when we think about some of these Caribbean communities, especially those that haven't been significantly influenced or altered by the West, even though the people have lived in the Caribbean for centuries, a lot of them find some affiliation between those lifestyles and the lifestyles portrayed in Nollywood, whether it's in terms of family or the arts, even some of the foods. So they're well received. But I think, you know, like I stated earlier, I think they would be even much better received if we can focus a little bit more on enhancing quality. But they're well received. My best man, who's originally from Barbados, you know, whenever I visit him, he's watching Nollywood movies and sharing them with me as well. And he's just one example, but I believe it's being well received. I really think so.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Damaris to close us out. Thank you so much for entertaining our questions. We had so many of them and it was very insightful. It was nice to have you with us, Professor Effiong.
Thank you. The purpose for me was to at least have 60% of the time, you know, interacting and talking. So thank you.
So thank you so much. Again, I can't state enough how we're always very privileged to have these conversations within the African Tea Time sessions, because it's a space where we can feel it. That's why even for introductions, we don't make them elaborate. We want everybody to feel welcome, to just have a free conversation with and engage our presenters all the time. So thank you so much again, Professor Effiong. And I know Joe has left, but we're still very appreciative of his time.